That special tug is a brilliant episode of 2.5 Men and painfully relatable. This is the 12th episode of the third season of 2.5 Men. This is directed by Schiller, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode. I will go through things chronologically and share some thoughts. And interestingly, while I tend to not care for episodes that jump back and forth with the timeline, with this one they are technically flashbacks, but they're flashbacks to very recent events. I actually don't mind jumping back and forth. I think it works quite well. It starts off with Charlie talking with Dr. Freeman. Of course, this is Jane Lynch, and he's telling a story. And this story led him to getting therapy, and we don't find out until the end why he decided to get therapy, and I will of course reveal that at the end of the discussion. But it starts off in the brief flashback with Alan and Charlie in a bookstore. They're going to the movies, but they're killing some time, and Alan is missing Jake, and he's thinking about the passage of time, and he decides, with Charlie's prompting, Charlie tells him to use the time away from Jake to do something he's always wanted to do, and Alan decides he wants to read the classics. So he starts to pull off all of these books from the bookshelves, and he mentions Byron. If you're going to mention Byron in a sitcom, you're going to get extra brownie points from me. And then he says, and I quote, and please excuse the oral grammatical error here, but he says, "There's too many books and there's not enough time." I feel you, Alan. I completely feel you there. And we find out as we cut back to the therapist's office that Charlie actually left Alan in the bookstore and went to the theatre, but Alan managed to catch him up, and Alan starts shouting goobers, which, as a British person, I have no idea what goobers are, but thankfully I have Google, and apparently they are Nestle's chocolate-coated peanuts. And that's interesting enough. Alan is shouting goobers in the movie theatre. He then starts to, at Charlie's prompting, Charlie, to his credit, does try to help Alan with this nervous breakdown that he's clearly having. His tactics are not necessarily effective, but he does at least initially try. And he encourages him to do the brain teaser on the screen. And that's a great idea. I've never seen that in a British cinema, having some kind of brain teaser or film quiz on the screen before the start. That's so much more interesting than adverts. I don't mind the trailers, but the adverts, I know that's how they get the money, whatever. But having some kind of quiz on the screen would be so much more exciting. And one of my favourite quotes in the whole episode, aside from "there's too many books and not enough time," is "Pirates of the Blow It Out Your Ass," which I absolutely loved. Of course, Alan is having some kind of breakdown here. We then see them in the car, and I will say now that I think they do a great job of showing the signs of what a nervous breakdown could look like, or what a panic attack could look like. We see various stages here, and I think it does a really great job of showing those signs. And we also see some moments with Charlie on how not to try and help in the situation. So I think it does do a great job of raising awareness, while of course also being rather funny. We're in the car, and Alan says that since they decided to skip the movie, they could go and see Jake. And my expression then was the same as Charlie's, because they didn't decide to skip the movie. They had to leave because of Alan's outburst. And it's almost like now he's out of that part of his breakdown. He doesn't remember how he acted, which I think is quite interesting. And they then arrive at the house where Jake is. He's at a friend's party, and the friend's mother tells Alan and Charlie that she's actually run out of ice cream. She's just going to nip out and get some. Will they watch the kids for a minute? And then we hear the screech of tires. She's not coming back anytime soon. And we find out that actually she came back 3 hours later. Alan and Charlie are in the car again, and Alan experiences claustrophobia. He needs to get out the car now. Charlie has to stop the car now, and once Charlie stops the car, Alan is fine. But Charlie has had enough, and he tells Alan to get out the car, and he drives off. And that's also not how to handle the situation. They then are in the bar, and they meet two women. Alan actually opens up to them, and Charlie realises that Alan's getting a lot of attention because of how vulnerable he's being, so he tries to do the same and gets emotional, pretend emotional, because at least Alan has a son. And of course the girls go back to Charlie's house with Alan and Charlie. A couple of comments about eating disorders that I really could have done without, and then and then the house is on fire. Like, what? That came out of nowhere. The drapes are ablaze, and we're then back in the psychiatrist's office, and Dr. Freeman asks him, so why are you here? Which is a good question, because we still haven't established that. And Charlie reveals, and this is not something that I thought was going to be the case. I thought, and this is just, I couldn't remember what happened in this episode, and I might be thinking of something else. If I'm thinking of another TV show, please let me know. But I predicted incorrectly that it was court-mandated therapy because of something Charlie did to Alan during one of his breakdowns. That's what I was predicting was going to happen. But now that I've said that, I feel like that might be the plot of a sitcom episode. I'm not sure. But that's not what happens here. Charlie reveals that actually he's gone to therapy because he's thinking about killing Alan. He's worried that he's going to snap, basically. So if he's at therapy beforehand, he can at least try and say that he can get off on an insanity charge. Or if not an insanity charge, something to that effect. And we end back in the kitchen with Alan looking over some drapes to replace the drapes that burnt down, and Charlie holding various implements, clearly imagining what it would be like to thwack Alan with them. And they have a lovely moment, actually. They have a lovely hug. Alan hugs Charlie and says he doesn't know what he'd do without them. And it's a really sweet moment, aside from the fact that Charlie is also planning on doing Alan in, to put it as plainly as possible. So I liked this episode a lot. I found a lot of relatability in Alan's behaviour. I found a lot of it funny, but also in a way that I think was quite eye-opening and thought-provoking. I think there are some recognisable behaviours there, so if anybody's going through something similar, we can see that actually it's better to seek help for that sooner rather than later. It's also quite interesting that Jake is in this for a matter of seconds. I want to say like 10, 15 seconds maybe. He's not in it very much at all. And he didn't need to be for the purpose of the story. It was just a little bit unusual, but it worked enough. There are episodes where he's in it only a tiny bit, but I feel like this one has to be, so far, the shortest appearance. But that aside, I thought this was a fabulous episode. Really, really funny, painfully relatable, and I liked the overarching mystery of why Charlie was actually at therapy in the first place. It ticks all of the right boxes for me. That Special Tug is certainly an episode that I really thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm sure it's one that I will definitely watch again at some point.